Welcome to the World Forest Report with Dean Val and Dean Kevin. Like I promised, I'll be covering something about smoke jumpers. I mentioned that last week, who are the kind of first responders to forest fires. Okay, smoke jumpers are specially trained wildland firefighters who provide an initial attack response on remote wildland fires. They are inserted at the site of the fire by parachute. In addition to performing the initial attack on wildfires, they may also provide leadership for extended attacks on wildland fires. Shortly after the smoke jumpers touch ground, they are supplied by parachute with food, water, and firefighting tools, making them self-sufficient for 48 hours. History. Prior to the full establishment of smoke jumping, experiments with parachute insertion of firefighters were conducted in 1934 in Utah and in the Soviet Union. Earlier, aviation firefighting experiments had been conducted with air delivery of equipment and water bombs. Although this first experiment was not pursued, another began in 1939 in Washington's Metro Valley, where professional parachutists jumped into a variety of timbered and mountainous terrains, providing the feasibility of the idea. Smoke jumping was first proposed in 1934 in the Intermountain region by regional forester T.V. Pearson. By 1939, the program began as an experiment in Pacific Northwest region. The first official non-fire jump was made in the Nez Perce National Forest in the northern region in 1940 by John Ferguson and Lester Goler. The McCall Smoke Jumper program was established in 1943. Their base is on the Idaho shores of Payette Lake. The base is near 6 national forests: Nez Perce, Clearwater, Sawtooth, and Boise, Payette, Salmon, Challis, Wallows, Whitman. And in 1947, the McCall program trained 50 jumpers and completed the construction of new buildings and training facilities. In 1941, the first woman successfully completed the training program at the McCall program. In 1942, permanent jump operations were established in Winthrop, Washington, and the Nimola Camp, an abandoned civilian conservation corps camp, a mile north of the Forest Service 9-mile remount depot at Hewson, Montana, and about 30 miles northwest of Missoula. See, blah, blah, blah. The first smoke jumper training camp was at the Seeley Lake Ranger Station over 60 miles north of Missoula. The camp relocated to Camp Mernard in July 43. Here, when not fighting fires, the men spent much time pulling up hay to feed the hundreds of pack mules that carried supplies and equipment to guard stations and fire locations. To work fires, the men, organized into squads of 8 to 15, were stationed at 6 strategic points, also known as spike camps. And these are Seeley Lake, Big Prairie, and 9 Mile in Montana, Moose Creek and McCall in Idaho, and Redwood Ranger Station in southwestern Oregon at the edge of Cave Junction. The men worked from other spike camps as well, including some in Washington. And I know there's one in Redding, in Northern California, where a lot of the fires are being started up there in the Trinity Alps, in Southern Oregon, Northern California. Now here's operated by the United States Forest Service. In the Northwest, there's the Redmond Smoke Jumpers in Redmond, Oregon, the North Cascades Smoke Jumpers in Winthrop, Washington, In Northern California, the Region 5 smoke jumpers in Redding. Northern Rockies, they've got a bunch. And they're also organized by the Bureau of Land Management. Alaska has some, Great Basin, and Idaho has some. Physical fitness, they go through quite an ordeal. It's like a boot camp in Army, carrying, like the fellow mentioned in the video, 110 pounds packed for 3 miles. You have to do it within 90 minutes and run 1.5 mile in 11 or fewer minutes, 25 push-ups in 60 seconds, 45 sit-ups in 60 seconds, and 7 pull-ups. So in other words, you have to be in shape because it's the terrain that they often have to go through carrying their gear. It's like a military operation, basically. Let's see. And then they show movies here and TV shows related to smoke jumpers. Yeah, so I just wanted to give you I really didn't find too much about them, but I know that they were, I don't know how much they're used today really, or if it's just a kind of token gesture, because again, with all the satellite imagery and the technology we have today, why would the fires just get out of hand so quickly? And in the old days, without the technology, seemingly they could put these, when I was young, they could put these fires out without the big, millions of acres damage that they're doing these days. But of course, we know that the directed energy weapons, along with the chemtrails, along with the HARP, creating the winds, I mean, these are all created, and we have these devastating fires that are burning up the world. And that's very true. Just do your own research. Don't believe us, but just do something, to help people become more aware, because it's going on all around us. So that's it for me, basically. Any questions or comments before we go on to you, Kevin?
Well, like you were saying before the show started, I mean, they may present to the surface as though they're doing something and creating the means by which they can help to deal with the fires, but obviously, as the overall picture is they want the fires to take place, they're going to ensure that whatever they do produce, as in a remedy for it, is not going to succeed. So we can guarantee that whatever they're doing is not going to work because it's designed not to.
Yeah, and the numbers too, don't it? I mean, there's we get 300 in California, 300 smoke jumpers or something. If they really wanted to get on it, they could hire more of these people to, when fires did break out, which would be another source of, another interesting segment to find out how they actually locate the fires, or what they're doing supposedly to locate these fires with satellites and other technologies. But apparently they're just out of control before you know it. And, and all they can do is just contain it. But putting it out is, you never hear of anybody putting them out, because they get too big before anybody can get to them.
Yeah, because in theory, since they're starting the fires, they should know exactly when they're about to begin, shouldn't they?
Right, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
So they really wanted, to put them out because they know when they're going to start them. They could have all their crews already lined up ready.
But as it is, they can just wait and then, until they're ready, until the fire's out of control, and then send them in. Send the crews in. Sure, they got it all planned out.
There was an interesting movie, it came out a few years ago, called Reign of Fire, and it starred Christian Bale, and it involved basically a sort of apocalyptic future human race scenario in which all these miners had mined too deeply and they'd woken up all these dormant dragons that had apparently been sleeping for hundreds of thousands of years that the human race were unaware of, and they then came to the surface, completely decimated the human race, scorched everything, and then basically that would be how the movie began. We would be introduced to the situation in what would be their present day, where the survivors were maintaining themselves in what remained of human civilization, with the dragons flying about and destroying everything that was left. And it's quite interesting in that movie because they were actually using jumpers who are not dissimilar, the individuals who deal with the fires, as you just described from Wikipedia. They were using those same individuals with the same skills to eliminate the dragons. They were jumping out of the planes and attaching little grenades to them and things like that. And these were like military parachute corps individuals. And so in a way, it's a similar analogy if you consider the dragon to represent the fire, and the source of which would be a dragon, which would obviously be reptilian, which the source of everything that's happening to humanity would be reptilian orientated. So it had similar sort of parallels to that in a funny sort of way.
Yeah, very true. Very true. That's it's going on all the time. All these funny things here. So
in a way, you could argue again it was the controllers putting it in people's faces through the movies as to what's actually going on. The scorching of the earth, the dragons that were doing it, basically revealing what the source of the fire actually is.
These are fire-breathing dragons. Yes, yes. Nikaya's joining us. Friend Nikaya. I was just telling her we just finished the segment on smoke jumpers. I played a little video and talked about the history that started in the 30s, where they sent these paratroopers down into the fires to make fire lines, subdue them, and make kind of to get on it. Like in the early days, it seemed like when we were younger, I mean, the fires were not so devastating, because they got put out and seen and put out before they got too much. And nowadays, it seems like they're out of control before you know it.
Yeah.
They're just a matter of containing them, and they're basically out of control. So we know that they're started purposely by the directed energy weapons, and the chemtrails in the soil and all that are making the fires hotter. And the winds, they can control the winds to make the fires spread through HAARP, etc. And this weekly report, is just talking about the world fire situation and reforestation. So we're just on to Kevin now. He's going to talk about his segment here.
Okay, the first article is regarding what's transpiring in California. A big thing at the moment is an almighty forest fire that was threatening the giant sequoias there and the small communities in the Sierra Nevada area. And so this has been going on for a number of weeks. And so I was going to touch on this last week, but we ran out of time. But nevertheless, I'll continue on with the most recent information regarding this, so it's up to date. It seems to be a big thing at the moment, and so it is still unclear how the giant sequoias of California will fare as two fires which together have scorched more than 140,000 acres in their namesake national park and national forest continue to burn. Thick smoke and rugged, inaccessible terrain has hindered efforts to assess destruction from the KNP complex and windy fires, and a full accounting may take weeks. Scientists on the ground say so far the news has been both good and bad. There are still pockets of lush greenery left within the footprints of two fast-moving fires, as well as areas where the flames left little in their wake. But one thing remains abundantly clear. With drier and hotter conditions, the fires, the forests, and the stakes have changed. The incredibly resilient sequoias that have grown on these ridges for thousands of years, coexisting and evolving with wildfires that helped keep overgrowth at bay and clear space needed for seedlings. But as the changing climate intensified conditions, causing fires to burn bigger and hotter, the tall trees are starting to succumb in larger numbers. During last year's castle fire, which blackened 175,000 acres in Sequoia National Park, up to 14% of the world's sequoias were lost to the flames, an alarming development for the trees once believed to be largely fire-resistant. Scientists are now afraid the species may not survive if wildfires continue to grow more severe. I have been suspending disbelief before I enter any grove, said Garrett Dickman, a biologist at Yosemite National Park, who is involved in the damage assessments in the groves impacted by the Windy Fire. He has already witnessed spans of torched land where the fire burned so hot the trees were incinerated down to the last twig and branch. In one grove, where he counted 29 of the tall trees destroyed, the ashen aftermath was littered with fallen fragments, their original shape burned into the soil. You can almost think of it like a chalk outline of a giant sequoia, he said. Changing climate has set in motion a devastating cycle, made worse by years of land management practices that enabled the forest to become overgrown. Parched vegetation fuels the fires, as the hot, dry conditions whip flares faster and higher into the forest canopy, threatening the trees that once thrived in the flames. Mired in a drought, the overgrowth dries and dies, littering the forest floor. In nearby Yosemite, where Dickman typically works, he said there was an eye-popping 125 tons of biomass that needed to be removed on every acre, more than 10 times the amount he calls normal. It is like having a 737 made of wood parked on every acre, but instead of it being full of jet oil, it is full of kiln-dried lumber, he said. When it burns hotter, drier, and faster than ever before. Trees that were totally immune to this in the past are no longer. The death toll for the trees is expected to be significant, but there have also been big wins during the at times dramatic firefights, and many popular groves have been spared. In others, where the flames got in, but severity was low or moderate, researchers believe the burn will be beneficial. Anthony Ambrose, a forest ecologist and researcher at the non-profit organisation the Marmot Society, said the fate of a grove depends on what condition it was in before the fire and the weather patterns such as wind, heat, and humidity when the flames burned through. But even if trees survive the flames, they may be weakened enough to succumb to other ailments, such as beetle attacks. Ambrose says scientists have been seeing such attacks on singed trees, further weakened by the drought, a phenomenon that had not been documented until recent years. If they are healthy trees, they are able to fight off any attack. But what we are seeing now is this kind of novel combination of impacts from fire and drought that are making the trees vulnerable. With little relief on the horizon and another dry winter in the forecast, drought conditions are expected to worsen over the next year. That does not bode well for scorched sequoias. Nathan Stevenson, a government scientist based in Sequoia National Park, who has studied the impact changing climate is having on forests, said the outcome could become a permanent shift. There is a good possibility that a lot of these forests may not come back as forests in our lifetime, he said, adding that other plants and trees could soon replace the giants that have stood there through the centuries. People often think that because changing climate is happening slowly, ecosystems are going to change slowly and adapt as the climate changes. Instead, he explained, the climate hits a threshold that can change landscapes and ecosystems in abrupt and extreme ways. You have burning conditions we haven't seen in the past, he said, noting that crown fires, when flames soar high into the air and burn through canopies, were never before seen in giant sequoias. Still, there will be many areas where fire behavior is not extreme. Stevenson said this isn't either a bad story or a good one, it's both. Fire is an essential ingredient for forest health, and even in big blazes that exhibit extreme behavior, there are often important benefits. It is certainly bad when 10 to 14% of all big sequoias get killed, but other groves in that fire burned in a beneficial way that will make them more resilient to wildfires in the future. He said of the castle fire last year, the same thing is going on now. In the aftermath of this year's fires, there will still be big steps to take. Policy makers will have to decide whether to replant the areas that were severely burned, and how to clear the fallen firs and pines killed in the flames from the forest floor. It won't be long before the victims of this fire act as fuel for the next one. You have a window where you can catch your breath, Stevenson said. But we are still going to have to look to the future.
Yeah, you know, Nikaya, when I was on the hike with my son in Oregon, we hit some areas in the forest of Oregon, southwestern Oregon, where we had lightning fires in the forest. We walked right through them. I'm not saying that the lightning doesn't cause huge fires, but these particular ones were just like, you could just walk right by. They're just little pockets, you know, little small pockets here, there, everywhere. There really wasn't a lot of flammable brush around them to make them expand, but these were lightning fires, and a lot of times that's what they say these fires are caused from: lightning, dry lightning. Careless campers, that's so lame when they say careless campers or somebody, you know, arson. If the only arson is like they're the arsons, but it's interesting to see how they claim these fires start, especially in places like Siberia where it's like ice and you know, like cold, and even the Amazon where it's green and there's a lot of moisture around in both the soil and the atmosphere. I mean, how these fires get going to such an extent. Their excuses are, and the scientists who do this, who, you know, make the call, are just it doesn't make sense a lot of the times. Not saying that they can't start naturally, but most of these fires have a really like suspicious, like, how are they starting? They don't really, and they say, you know, we don't know the cause of the fire, you know, or sometimes they point it to somebody and he started it or something, and then that's their favorite thing to do. You know, and then of course climate change, dry conditions, the climate. They're blaming it on that, which again, yeah, the drought and dry conditions, but you can only do that so long or so far, but these fires are just out of control. So, do you have anything, Nakaya, to say? Do you have any experience up there? Any fires going on in Northern California where you're at?
Yeah, I was just wondering, what's the reasoning behind all this arson and stuff? What's their target? What are they aiming at? What's the deal?
Kevin, you want to address that?
It's rather a big topic to put in a nutshell, but overall, the fires, as everything that is taking place in regards to the plight of humanity, is all orchestrated ultimately for the control of the species. So anything they do is toward that end. So in regards to the fires, what they're doing is making vast areas of land uninhabitable, because one of their parts of their agendas can involve, they want to move everybody into very controlled and regulated smart cities, and they don't want an alternative option that individuals can survive in any wilderness or remote areas. So part of their agenda is to destroy all that which would present as an alternative. That would include all forestry regions, all open areas. Like they've completely decimated Australia, for example, to the extent that there's literally nothing living there in the bush. The water is completely contaminated. There's no food available whatsoever. And so the individual who had been covering the situations in Australia, Max Egan, he said effectively that is part of their game, because they need to have everybody with, as I said, with no other option than to go into the smart cities that they create. So as I said, part of their situation is part of their idea is to make every other option untenable. And so, yeah,
We went over this last week too about the high-speed trains. Eastern Australia has one, and then California, from LA to Northern California. The fires seem to be going along the routes of the proposed high-speed trains. You know, so they're burning out the people living in these areas, making it very difficult for them to rebuild almost impossible. The insurances won't pay out, the fire insurance. They need huge permits to get back and to start building, and they make it very hard. So they're moving people to the cities. Yes, these smart cities.
Oh my, wow. Well, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, so we're just making people aware of it. We're helping people become more aware of it. They can make choices where they want to support these controllers and what they're doing. Because a lot of it's like people are voting these people into office and supporting governments that are doing this, and they don't have to. We can do it better.
Yeah, if they knew who was doing it, they cared and they weren't afraid, they probably would not. But how do you know who's doing it?
Well, basically the controllers control the scientists and the media and everybody who's reporting on this, and the professional people who are supposedly, like talking about it. So they're paid off. So it's hard really for the public to get the information because everybody's sort of involved. Somebody said, well, if what you're saying is true, it'd have to be a huge conspiracy. Well, it is. It's a huge. People don't want to go there because it's so. Everybody's involved. All the systems, all the agencies, all the systems: medical, educational, government, health, scientific. They're all bought off and controlled by those few elites that are wanting to destroy the planet and move on. It's just what they do. They're destroyers, and they don't care. That's their fun.
Gosh.
So Kevin, if you want to go on, go ahead.
Yeah, go on. Is there more? There's more. Okay. Yeah.
There's always more.
Yeah, that's good. I want to hear more.
Yeah, ultimately, overall, I mean, we are supported by the natural environment, and so the controllers want to remove the support that we have on the natural environment by basically destroying it. So then we become completely dependent upon them. And another big facet of it as well is the more of the natural environment they destroy, in particular in regards to the trees, the more that will have a massive impact on the oxygen that is available. And of course, oxygen being absolutely essential for life. So this then moves them into another part of their overall agenda where they want to convert the entire planet and all the species on it, including the humans, into a more of a technological, robotized state of being. And so everything is moving from a biological form into a more technological one. And of course, it will come to the point where if they decimate the forests and the environment enough, it will force that issue, the biological body forms, when able to survive in an environment where there is nothing that can sustain them, because obviously all that sustains a biological vehicle comes from the natural environment, all the food, water, oxygen. So absent of that, would have no other option, transition into more robotized forms, and that is also where they're taking it as well. And so had real side experiences and they've been shown glimpses of the sort of world we are moving into, and you see a lot of the depictions on the movies, these sort of future robotized worlds where nothing is living and everything is just a mass of metal and mechanized madness. But anyway, the following article was written by Andy Erickson, September the 25th, 2021. The Greenwood Fire has reached its maximum peak containment of 80%. The number of personnel assigned to the fire continues to decrease, and all residential evacuations have been lifted since the lightning-caused fire was first detected over a month ago. Things are progressing very well, Incident Commander Jim Edgar said, "With the cooler temperatures and the moisture, it really settles that fire down. If and when we get 3 or 4 warm, nice sunny days with some wind blowing, that will bring some of that up to life again, and you'll see more smoke. Wetlands are preventing crews from building containment lines around the remaining 20% of the fire's perimeter." But Edgar said those wetland areas have so far seemed to act like a natural containment line. The day the fire made its big run, it kind of hit some of those wetland areas, and the fire intensity slowed down or stopped, he said. A lot of those areas, the black spruce lowlands, in a normal year, they don't carry fire very much. This year it's been so dry, the fire was burned very intensely through those. With the gain in the moisture we've had this last month, those are becoming much less likely to burn, but they're still not as wet as they normally are. The fire remains at nearly 26,800 acres without much threat of spreading, Edgar said. Crews responding to the fire focused on putting the fire out within 100 feet of the containment lines. But the more internal areas of the fire are likely still seeing activity, like stumps burning down to the roots, as well as smouldering dead vegetation and soil. The number of people assigned to the fire dropped to 125 on Friday. Roughly 500 people had been assigned to the fire in late August. Priorities have shifted mainly to patrolling the area and putting out hotspots, as well as restoring the area to its natural state as much as possible. Once fire crews are no longer concerned about a fire spreading to a location that they had previously scraped of vegetation as a preventative measure, they return vegetation to that area to protect the soil from erosion. Unless the situation changes, Edgar said, the Minnesota Incident Command System will likely return the fire response operations back to the Forest Service in no more than a couple of weeks. The Forest Service reduced the size of the Greenwood Fire closure on Tuesday. The closure currently includes lands and roads south of Minnesota Highway 1, including the Sand Lake Recreation Area and Rustic Campground, the McDougal Lake Area, and the Stony River Observation Point. Little Isabella Campground remains closed due to bear issues and rehabilitation. The following article was written by Duluth News Tribune, October the 2nd, 2021. The Superior National Forest rescinded nearly all of the remaining wildlife-related closures on Friday, October the 1st, including reducing the Greenwood Fire closure area to just the perimeter of the nearly 27,000-acre fire. The Forest Service also lifted the last of the closures in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness near the John Eck and Whelp fires. Low fire activity contributed to lifting the remaining closures, while the closure around the Greenwood Fire was reduced due to a containment of the fire, which has peaked at 80%, and decreasing fire risk, according to a news release from the Forest Service. Although the Greenwood Fire continues to show very little heat, some heat as well as snags and hazard trees have been observed in the interior of the fire's perimeter. Command of the Greenwood Fire returned to the Forest Service on Friday, after more than a month of leadership from incident management teams. Fire crews from the Toft Ranger District will monitor the fire area daily. The number of people assigned to the fire had dropped to 85 as of the Forest Service's latest situation report from Thursday. We are so grateful for the incident management teams, the firefighters, and the surrounding communities that dropped everything to support this response. Superior National Forest Deputy Forest Supervisor Shannon Reish said, "We are on the other side of this fire season. Thank you for sticking with us." Only private property is able to be accessed within the closure area. McDougall Lake Campground and the Stony River Observation Point remain closed, as well as Little Isabella Campground, due to heavy use from firefighters and bear sightings. The Forest Service pulled all equipment of the John Eck fire last week and hasn't observed any smoke from the fire for a couple of weeks. We feel comfortable lifting this closure as this fire is unlikely to spread much, if at all, Superior National Forest East Zone Fire Management Officer Patty Johnson said. That ends that report, so you can see how that fire in wherever that was is now being run its course and has concluded. But as they said, they claimed it was based on lightning, and amusingly enough, in regards to that Sequoia situation, they were blaming that, I think, on one random individual. Where was it? Oh, here we are. I think a 30-year-old woman was arrested on suspicion of starting that fire. And so not only will they blame lightning, climate change, they'll also blame random individual people, like you were saying, campfires out of control and such and so forth.
That's all it takes is on suspicion. So that makes her guilty already, you know. And interesting thing about these fires is like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Paradise, California, Nikaya, the campfire that was a couple years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah, my friend had to leave there, and my friend's brother, his house burned down.
Yeah, devastating. But what they do, they in that case, they had the military come in, they blocked it off. So any forensic coming in to investigate, they had full control of who came in, who was filming what, etc. Pretty much. The news media was told certain things. So they cover their bases in terms of like how these fires are investigated. and it's coming out more and more now about the
Hi.
Paradise Fire, just like 9/11 is coming out. There's more and more people looking at that, doing research on it. And same with the Paradise Fire. More home videos are coming out about lasers, like they're shooting lasers. They're filming lasers coming and starting the fire and different things, how the military blocked off certain roads and people were trapped. There's only one road out. They weren't reporting. They didn't give a heads up to people. I mean, they said it was okay, you know, people, it's under control where it wasn't. I mean, there's all kinds of conspiracies around it. And these fires that get started, I mean, they have control about how they report them and how they're being started. So that's part of it. And the other thing I wanted to mention was the methane part. These areas that are cold, like Siberia, and what they're doing with the drought and the weather, geoengineering the weather. I mean, they're melting the ice and the snow, and then the methane, which is highly flammable and poisonous when you breathe it, that's coming up, and then they're easier to start, the fires, because of the methane gas coming up. So they got it all figured out, the science of it.
Are you familiar with Reason TV?
Reason? No.
Reason, REASON. Okay, because they're talking about, wow. Yeah, they're talking about the same thing. Let's see, Reason TV, REASON. Of course, now that you have it, you can look it up. It's got all kinds of documentaries on what you guys are talking about. Wow.
Thank you.
Sure. Oh, wow.
Okay, we have like 15 minutes. You want to do the David Icke segment?
This book I'm going to read from is called The Trigger, and it's written by David Icke. This particular book was specifically documenting all the events around 9/11 and the real reasons why that took place. The reason why I'm going to tie it in now with the forest fires is because, as is he documented and many researchers have discovered, and as is the case, the 9/11 towers were brought down by directed energy weapons, which is the same technology they're using to destroy the forest fires, and so the technology is the same. It's just the application of it is slightly different and the target. And so I'm going to read stuff. I'm going to read a chapter here on the directed energy weapons. The following information was sourced from the book The Trigger by David Icke. The fact that the towers were brought down deliberately is a gimme for anyone prepared to look at the evidence and clear their minds of the 9/11 download program. I am not attached, however, to exactly how this was done, and I remain wide open to all possibilities. My aim here is to show that the official story didn't happen, because everything else comes from that. The obvious conclusion is the use of explosive charges as per familiar controlled demolition technique, which are employed all the time around the world to bring down big structures. Professor Stephen Jones and others have suggested the involvement of substances known variously as thermite, super thermite, and thermate. These are incendiary mixtures which can burn very fast and very hot. Jones was a professor of physics at Brigham Young University in Utah before he was suspended after entering the 9/11 debate and later chose to retire. He said that he became interested in the subject in 2005 because of the questions about Building 7 and many reports from Ground Zero of steel in a molten state still there weeks after the buildings fell. Researcher Christopher Bolin quotes Peter Tully, president of Tully Construction of Flushing, New York, describing pools of literally molten steel at the World Trade Center weeks into the cleanup operation. Particularly interesting were witnesses reporting molten steel in the basements of the 3 towers. Mark Loiseau, president of Controlled Demolition Incorporated in Maryland, told Bolin there were hot spots of molten steel in the basements, at the bottoms of the elevator shafts of the main towers, down 7 basement levels. Molten steel was discovered in the rubble of Building 7, which was not struck by an aircraft. This could not have been caused by the original, relatively low temperature fires, and certainly not weeks later. Professor Jones secured formerly molten metal fragments from the World Trade Center site, and he and other physicists put them through a series of experiments and tests. Jones' conclusion was they contained the elements that would be expected with the presence of thermite, superthermite, and thermate. He said the results are coupled with visual evidence at the scene, such as flowing yellow hot liquid metal, still red after falling about 500 feet, provide compelling evidence that thermite reaction compounds were used, meaning thermite was deliberately placed in both World Trade Towers and Building Number 7. Jones further contended that a souped-up version of thermite, known as thermate, could cut through steel beams and substantially reduce the melting point of steel. He said that thermate could cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. The military use thermate, which burns at higher temperatures than regular thermite, to cut through tank armor and bunkers. Thermate can even burn underwater and in other oxygen-starved locations. Professor Jones said thermate would explain molten metal seen falling from the still standing South Tower, and white smoke and ash emitting from the same area. He said they found elements in Ground Zero dust that strongly suggested the presence of thermite and thermate, and that strange corrosion on the dust-covered roofs of vehicles in the area would be expected with thermite residue. He claims that other finds in the rubble and dust point in the same direction. This is only the briefest summary of the thermite-thermate hypothesis, which has proved highly controversial even within the 9/11 truth movement. There are a number of interviews and presentations by Stephen Jones on the internet for those who wish to look deeper at the claims. A very different explanation circulating over the years is the use of directed energy weapons to bring down the towers. I am not saying this did happen or didn't, but I come back to a point I have emphasized over and over. The technology we see is not the cutting edge of technology that actually exists. Selling a perception of what is possible is a major element of the human perception program. If you limit perception of the possible in the target population, they will dismiss explanations that are true because the truth appears to be impossible to a programmed perception. It may be impossible to their perception of reality, but not to actual reality. World-changing technology developed in secret projects and underground bases is sitting there waiting for the right moment in the continuing sequence of human control to be played out in the public domain. This includes directed energy technology that could turn an enormous building to dust. These weapons exist today in the world of the known, and so they would have existed, and then some, in the world of the hidden at the time of 9/11. I highlighted Beam's weapons in Alice in Wonderland in 2002 and pointed out that some 425,000 cubic yards of World Trade Center concrete disintegrated mostly as immense clouds of dust. One witness said there was not a single block of concrete in that rubble. Dr. Charles Hirsch, the government's chief medical examiner, reportedly told grieving relatives in December 2001 that many bodies had been vaporized, and at that time only 500 of the nearly 3,000 who died had been identified. I described in Alice how the American Free Press had interviewed a German physicist who believed a laser beam weapon could have caused the collapse of the Twin Towers using infrared technology that was first developed in the Soviet Union. The physicist, who the American Free Press does not name, was described as a former East German physicist who studied Soviet infrared technology and plasmoids during the 1960s and 70s. He was acclaimed to be directly involved in the demonstration of a Soviet laser beam weapon for the US Air Force in Weimar in 1991. According to the physicist, the Soviet weapon was used during a Soviet dispute with China in 1969 to destroy a wall at the Ussuri River, which separates Manchuria from Russia. Infrared radiation employs invisible wavelengths between visible light and microwave on the electromagnetic spectrum and produces fantastic heat. It creates a potentially devastating phenomenon called a plasmoid cloud of heated and ionized gas. The United States had been developing and deploying such weapons for many years, and one of its centers of development was the Brookhaven Laboratories on Long Island, New York. Author Jeff Hecht wrote in his appropriately 1984 book, Beam Weapons, The Next Arms Race. The military destructor beam definitely is in our future tactical arsenal. Advanced technology and plasma physics involved in directed energy weapons gave them unprecedented lethal power. They could unleash devastating beams of energy in seconds and less. The German physicist told American Free Press, "From my experience as a physicist and research scientist with the GRU, Russian military intelligence, I have enough experience to judge that the World Trade Towers have been burning too quickly, too hot, and too completely to have been caused by the kerosene fires that resulted from the crashes. Furthermore, the demolished buildings nearby are an indication that there was a plasmoid cloud involved, which probably affected the buildings nearby." He said that in 1991, the GRU demonstrated for the US Air Force Electronic Security Command, AFESC, the capabilities of its infrared beam weapon by reducing a ceramic plate to dust from a distance of 1 mile. He said the demonstration was designed to show the US how a stealth bomber could be turned into dust in the same way. The plate had been disintegrated into such fine dust, he said, that it was difficult to pick up with a vacuum cleaner. The plate was not destroyed suddenly, as if hit by a bullet. Rather, it disintegrated in a process taking about 15 minutes. The physicist said that one of the transmitters involved in striking the World Trade Center with a beam weapon could have been located in a high building nearby or on a satellite, plane, or ship. Russian state-funded TV station RT reported in 2018 that microwave-directed energy weapons were being tested at firing ranges in Russia. The prototypes were designed to burn missile homing systems and could be incorporated in the arsenal of 6th-generation fighter jets. Vladimir Mikheyev, deputy head of CRET, a leading electronic warfare contractor, said that these cutting-edge weapons systems exist and progress quite effectively, according to the TASS news agency. Mention of Russia here is not an indication that they were involved in 9/11, only that such weapons existed at the time of the attacks, and the American military also had them. Mind you, judging by the hysterical demonization of Russia, may be the best way to get a new investigation into a 9/11 is to claim the Russians did it.
And the witnesses here, again, the media controls who says what, who gets to say what. So they can even hire witnesses to say certain things like they do at political rallies, hire a mob, you know, so they can say whatever they want. The film footage too is a little, you know, you could see the plane. Well, one building didn't even get hit by a plane, and they claimed it did. And what, building 7 is it?
If I remember, what happened was, I think that building 7, wasn't that the building that went down and was nowhere near the 2 main towers? And they were reporting on the news that building 7 had collapsed. But while the reporter was making mention of it, the building was still behind her. And so that indicated there was a slight breakdown in communications, suggesting that building 7 was planned to go down. And but they'd got their memos mixed up, and she was supposed to report it after it went down and not beforehand. I think that was building 7. I could be wrong.
Yeah. So again, they control your perception, you know, with the media and who says what. And then later on, you know, these scientists get together, like there's a whole team, a whole organization of 9/11 scientists that, you know, have done their research, but they don't care. The controllers don't care, you know, even if it comes out what they really did, because by then the media has already formed a perception for the main public, and everything else is conspiracy. So even if the truth, so-called truth, does come out, they don't really care, because, and they like the division. They like the people. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Oh, you know, they like the separation, the division, the infighting amongst people. They encourage it even. So it's, yeah, what it is. I don't know if Nakai has anything to say about that. Did you have any friends in 9/11, or do you know anybody that was in there?
Oh, yeah, you know, and with 9/11, you know, and the Mercury, was it the Mercury News, San Jose Mercury, right? Is that the name of it, David?
Yes, yes.
Anyway, they had a whole bunch of stories in there where they talked about things that you don't normally see on newspapers, etc. I mean, they did talk about conspiracy, all kinds of things. I was really surprised. Did you ever catch that on the Mercury newspapers during that time?
No, I don't remember, but they did have Gary Webb, who exposed the CIA drug deals, and they got rid of him. So he was with the Mercury. So maybe they're a little bit liberal or a little bit open to that.
Yeah, it's shocking. They publicized all kinds of news that you wouldn't expect to hear about 9/11. Yeah, they weren't hiding it at all. Oh my God. So I don't know. I'm very curious to see what's going on and why. I mean, what do they think? They don't. First of all, they don't really think they're going to be able to wipe out everything and control everything the way they're doing it, do they? I mean, is this really going to work?
Well, it's about agreement. People are agreeing. I mean, you could see people taking the shot, and there's people resisting, but then if it gets too bad for them, they can just bring in the military and just force people to do whatever they want. They've got the military. And as you can see, they've got the technology here. Most of it.
And exactly who are they? Are they aliens? Are they?
I think Kevin knows who they are.
Huh?
I think Kevin knows who they are. Who's they, Kevin?
Who is they?
Who's the big they? Who's lurking in the shadows and manipulating all of human affairs, of which the who we see as representing our leaders are but puppets? Well, we're dealing with, from our perspective, what would be an alien race, and they would be reptilians. They hail from the Orion system. they have controlled and manipulated the human species from day one, because in fact they were actually it's a very long history, but at one time they sailed across the universes in their ships. They came across the planet Earth, and they found a very intelligent species of monkeys that resided on the planet, and they decided to genetically manipulate and upgrade them to turn them into a slave species, and that was the origins of humanity. And the reptilians have been controlling and managing human affairs ever since, generally operating from the shadows and out of sight, but nevertheless they are there. And now their agenda is, because humanity is waking up to what's going on a massive scale, and awareness is increasing at an alarming rate beyond which they can control. They have various control agendas in place, as I said, their robotisation ideas and the machinations, but ultimately they're not beyond pulling the plug. And at the moment, it seems their agenda is more leaning towards the want for complete depopulation and the destruction of the planet. In other words, if they can't control a species that they dominate, they will destroy it, and that's what they're currently doing. And that, again, is what Val mentioned earlier as to why they're destroying the rainforests and destroying basically what is that which supports our species. And of course, it wouldn't concern them, because they don't actually operate directly from this planet, and they have the technology in which they can leave it at any time, whereas we're rather resigned to this planet. And so,
yeah, I guess it's a lot easier to do this than it is to create war and just blow us up with nuclear weapons, huh? I mean, why don't they do it that way?
well, they're doing it every way they possibly can.
Oh, okay.
I mean, all their wars. I mean, if you're talking about a reptilian species which owns basically the planet, which owns and has created all the systems through it, and which also owns and puppeteers all the governments of every country in the world, then basically you can see that no war is by accident, but rather by design. And so that is all part of their various agendas, which bring us up to our current point. Because again, I mean, in order to control the species and to continually to control it, you have to have what they call a globalization and a consolidation of and a complete micromanaging of consciousness. And they do that by creating certain countries they want as invasion countries, which then subjugate all others, and will bring them all into a it'll basically be a means of which they can mold the consciousness, because you mold the consciousness, you mold that which affects into overall human experience. And so to control a species utterly, you have to have all the individuals of the species all deciding on the same or similar lines. And so they can't have any, therefore, cultural divisions or any countries that are operating with individual little collective consciousnesses which are dissimilar to that which they want as a model for which they can bring about the overall human experience that they desire. And hence why they are busy destroying all indigenous peoples, all other ancient cultures, and sort of bringing them into what you would call the Western model, as it were. And so, yeah, it's all towards that end. And I said now they're on a complete planetary destruction that's their current goal: complete planetary destruction and destruction of the species. But as Dwayne was saying the other day, they could just pull the plug anytime they want. But they are rather of the inclination that they rather delight in the suffering of their slaves, and so it's like a little bit of a game to them. And so that's another reason why they're dragging out the slow decimation of the human species, because it is their entertainment and their sensation. And
okay.
and
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, and as Dwayne has also said, even if they wipe out the species, it doesn't mean that then humanity is then liberated from their controlling clutches, because we have a simulation basically which is reptilian controlled throughout all dimensions of it, from the physical to the ethereal. So even if you transition, pass over, and your body vehicle expires, you are still in their controlled matrix unless you extract yourself from it. And that can only be done through real awareness, where you step aside from a consciousness that they have controlled and managed. And so they couldn't care less whether people die, they've still got them as their controlled slaves, even on transition. And then they'll return into future embodiments and situations in which they will still be controlled by the reptilians in other situations, circumstances, species, and planets. And so there we are. it's a lot. There's a lot of detail to it. It's hard to put in a nutshell, but yeah.
That's right. Here we are.
And then one way
Well,
to,
okay.
yeah,
I need to go because I have an appointment, but that was really enlightening. So I'd like to continue hearing more about this at another time.
yeah, Kevin will continue with David Icke's book next week, but we're on what's today? Wednesday at, no, Tuesday at 3 Pacific time. And this is recorded too. And by the way,
Okay.
to get out of this matrix, you can try this sound. It's NUUU. Kevin?
Nice.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here, Nikaya. Thanks, Dean Kevin.
Thank
See
you
next
again.
week.